Here's my story. I was married to my wife for 7 years. I knew something was up after several times I had arrived home from work to find only my teenage daughter at home and my wife missing. She'd always tell me what her mom told her to tell me. An example would be that she went grocery shopping to see a woman friend from work, other kinds of shopping, or had to help somebody with something. My daughter never seemed like she was aware she was lying, which is good. I don't think my wife would have the nerve to burden our daughter with any secrets she kept from me. I was so annoyed that I decided to come home a little early for a few days. Each time I sat in my car down the street to see if my wife left. On the third day she left and I followed her. She got to Bosco's, which gave me relief at first because maybe she told the truth each time, but then I saw the man she was meeting at the entrance. He was tall, handsome, and rich-looking. He kissed my wife enthusiastically before they went inside. My wife's birthday was the next day and I swore this seemed like some kind of birthday shopping spree when I wouldn't be suspicious of her absence. I went inside Bosco's and walked around close enough to see how they interacted. It was extremely romantic behavior. I started filming and it took a few minutes for me to catch him grabbing her butt. I wanted to set the building on fire. I was so mad. I filmed for as long as I could, but then AP saw me staring at them. I left the building and got to my car, but before I drove away I saw him come out with my wife's hand in his. She looked concerned and puzzled, trying to see who he was talking about. Hopefully she was feeling panic like I was. I returned home and wondered what I should say to my daughter. She was 17, so kind of old enough to handle adult issues, but either way it was going to be really upsetting. I told her I saw her mom with another man, so I was going to stay at Grandma's for a while. She asked if she could come with me because she'd been thinking about helping Grandma with her garden. I thought that was the cutest and most uplifting thing I could have heard at that moment. We packed some bags and left, no tears or worrying. Grandma was excited to see us and I felt like it was all gonna be okay. My wife returned shortly after that to our empty house. I left her a note on the counter that I was the one watching them and I had proof she was romantically involved with him. I told her to enjoy her birthday alone in an empty house because that's what she deserved. Unfortunately the house was hers, so she was able to keep living there, but she couldn't have AP move in because he got arrested for doing some illegal things. I'm happy to report that my ex was heartbroken. She couldn't believe she betrayed the happy and secure family she built for a man that bought her things and stole stuff. She told me a lot of her honest thoughts on voicemail ramblings. She maintained a distant relationship with our daughter that took years to return to normal. I'm sad to say that she really started to hate the things about herself that reminded her of her mom. I told her she was her own person, mixed with two people's DNA and unique among anyone else. I told her she could only be in control of herself, her own decisions and her emotions. I reminded her that letting hatred or bitterness simmer in your heart only makes that how you behave. I told her to start writing in a journal and she said I was preaching, but I did notice her seeming more joyful and grateful a few days later. She gardened with Grandma and went to visit her mom sometimes. Opie, I'm sorry your wife gave up the marriage you both had and betrayed her own daughter. She looked up to her mom for an example of how a good woman behaves. However, the advice you gave her was spot on and I think your daughter learned how not to behave. Sometimes that kind of example is just as effective as a good example. It's lucky you're a wise father and was there to notice she needed a little father preaching to help her get through some issues and doubts that arose because of her mother's poor behavior. She must have been extremely shallow and materialistic to be tempted by a man on the notion of being spoiled. Take your time finding a better and more honest woman. I wish nothing but good fortune and luck to you, your daughter, and Grandma. Thank you for sharing your story. Now let's get into today's second story. After being married for 8 years, my wife and I were actually invited to my mom's house. She was married to the most horrible man in existence, my stepfather. They had an offspring from hell named Lester. Lester was already 20 by the time we were invited to their house. For the purpose of story flow, I'll sometimes refer to both of them as steps. When I was still living with them, Lester and I never spoke. It was like he saw the goodness in who I was and was allergic to it. All he ever did when we were younger was break stuff or get into trouble and then blame me. He had it out for me from the beginning and I assumed it was because of who his father was. My stepfather never tried to develop a relationship with me. All he ever did was tell me he was in charge and I needed to fear him. Since Lester was his little minion, he used him as an extension of himself. So it had been a very long time since I saw my own mother, and my wife of 8 years never met any of my family. On the way there, I warned her that my stepfather and stepbrother were the worst people you'd ever meet and she shouldn't feel compelled or forced to communicate with them at all. She sincerely listened to my warning like the good girl she was. I wasn't worried at all about her being unable to handle a little social awkwardness or even some rude comments. She was a good wife, and for all I knew my steps had changed for the better in the past decade. We arrived safely at their house, which looked exactly the same as when I left. The introductions were awkward. The steps both looked my wife up and down without hiding the fact that they were checking her out. They barely greeted me. My mom was the one attempting to have a normal social gathering. She brought dinner out on the table where we all had to sit across from each other. The men stare at my wife like she was a television show. I asked them to stop staring at her, and that's when some yelling started. My stepdad said that I was the guest here and he could look wherever he wanted. My stepbrother said she deserved better than me, but tried to lessen the magnitude of what he said because of my mother's reaction. I don't know how, but my mom recovered from this exchange smoothly. I think I just missed her a lot and longed for this visit to go smoothly and peacefully. Plus, I felt like my wife and I were safe. I certainly didn't expect what was going to happen late that night. I woke up in the middle of the night in my sleeping bag on the living room floor. My wife wasn't on the couch anymore. I looked around and checked the bathroom but still couldn't find her. Now I was groggy and growingly concerned. I didn't like that she was missing with my terrible steps in the same house. I decided to check my parents' bedroom very quietly, and I only saw my mom sleeping. I checked Lester's room a little less quietly and found the scene of a nightmare. My wife was having sex with my stepfather. I wish this was just a nightmare, but it was actually happening. My mom ran in to see what was wrong and she saw everything too. She walked straight over to slap the hell out of my stepdad repeatedly. He actually fell over. Then she ran off and slammed the door of the bathroom. I felt so horrible. My mother shouldn't have had to see it, but these bastards didn't even care. Then I looked at my wife and demanded to know why she did this. She just sat on the bed covering her face. She started shaking like she was sobbing, and she looked up with her ugly cry face to mouth sorry to me. This didn't make any sense at all. The respectable and kind wife I knew was gone. I told my mom to come with me. We packed our stuff and went back to my house, leaving my cheating wife with the steps. My mom lived with me while we both filed for divorce. She was a wreck just as much as I was, but we actually did bond and have good times together for the first time since I was really young. Before I knew it, she was making jokes about us going club hopping together. Prior to our first court date, my wife got a ride back to our neighborhood by paying for a long Uber drive. When she showed up at my door, I was very surprised and unhappy to see her. I told her I had nothing to say to her. She just needed to show up to court. She got on her knees and begged me to let her in. She just needed to get some of her stuff and figure out where to go. She hadn't been able to charge her phone for a while and told me that it wasn't long before the steps started treating her like a prisoner. I told her I would never understand why she agreed to go in that room and cheat on me. Then I slammed the door in her face and locked it. She would have no mercy or communication from me. In court, my mother got alimony from my stepfather and continued living in my house. I stayed with her for a while, but once the divorce was final, I let her rent my house cheap while I found a new place to call my home. I believed in keeping close to my mother, but not that close. I needed to be independent and remain an eligible bachelor if I was to find a woman of equal quality. I got settled into my house really well before allowing any women to come over. I never saw or heard from my ex. She failed to show up to court for a divorce. I never heard from the steps ever again, but I did find out that Lester was sent overseas in the army after his dad died in a construction work accident. It doesn't sound like a very happy life, and that's all I'll sum them up to. I'm happy with where I ended up after losing my wife of 8 years. I hope my story stops people from cheating because it causes mass destruction and pain. Hopefully more for the cheater than the victim, though. Wow, Opie, I am sorry your wife chose to put herself in a situation that allowed for her to cheat on you. I'm not sure what she was thinking, but it's clear they were giving her attention, which indicates they thought she was attractive. Maybe she let this attention go to her head and she simply didn't think about the consequences or how you'd feel knowing the truth of her actions. This is just really despicable to me that she couldn't use a little self-control and modesty to avoid breaking your heart and ending her marriage. Who knows how long she would try to hide this from you if you didn't find out. My guess it is a really long time, even if her behavior changed. I'm glad you didn't have any children with her, OP. I'm glad you have a second chance and got your mom out of a bad situation too. I wish you the best of luck going forward. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, hey folks, welcome back to my channel Relationship Haven. In today's story, Opie found out his wife was cheating on him after he saw his wife's affair partner do something absolutely shocking right in front of him after his wife had invited the affair partner over to watch a movie with them. In today's second story, Opie's soon-to-be ex is trying to get the police involved after Opie kicked her out and she refused to leave the house. Opie then had to force her out by using physical force. Now he needs advice on how to proceed since his wife has a chance of getting him in trouble over a situation she instigated. Let's get into the stories to find out what happened. I just found out about this sub as a suggestion from a comment over in Reddit Relationship Advice and figured I'd tell my story here. Thank you all in advance for reading. If you were on November of 2020, my then wife started hanging out with a guy that she knew from before but had little contact with while we were dating. One night, we were watching a movie while he was over hanging out and I saw he was softly scratching her back slowly back and forth. I told him to stop, then got up and left the house before I exploded in anger. She came out and, long story short, told me that I was overreacting and that if I asked him to leave, she would go with him. Now, I remember being shocked that she would make that decision and wrote it off as her anger getting the better part of her. The guy, let's call him L, was going through a rough divorce and my wife talked me into letting him stay on the couch so he didn't have to live with his ex-wife. He was emotionally unstable and depressed, so sometimes she would sleep in the same room and sometimes on the same futon as him. I was not okay with this, but she assured me nothing was happening and I trusted her. Fast forward a few months and she helped Al get a new apartment after his divorce was finalized. I'm supportive of her having other friends because she's a stay-at-home mom of a 5-year-old that was from a previous relationship before us. One night, they both got drunk and had sex. Then again, a few weeks to a month later, he tells her to either have sex with him again or he will tell me that they had sex. At this time, I had my suspicions about what was going on and I asked her straight up, but she either lied to me or made me feel bad about not trusting her. She eventually broke things off. Fast forward to May and I found out she has Tinder on her phone. I asked her what was up and she said it was just to find friends since she is cooped up in the house alone all the time. I told her that Tinder isn't the right place for that, but again, I'm supportive of her making friends. As far as I know, she had 2 guys over during this time. One while I was at work who just came by to take a shower after work and head off to a party so we didn't have to drive home. And another who she invited over while I was there and cuddled with on the couch. When I said I wasn't comfortable with her doing that, she basically told me to because she wasn't doing anything wrong. Now fast forward to June, she meets a guy, let's call him Cal, and starts talking with him. She also brings up that we should open up our relationship and go poly, to which I said no way. She still decided to start spending alone time with him and eventually gives oral once in our house. Later she told me that she did so out of fear and to just get him out of the house, but she continues talking with him after. He breaks it off with her and blocks her. It is at this point when the guilt finally brings her to tell me about cheating on me with both Al and Cal. She only tells me about the first time with Al and says that her and Cal did it in a hotel. I didn't trust her anymore because of all the other red flags and lies about not cheating when I asked previously, but I forgave the cheating. She then started to become cold to me, not wanting to hang out or do anything together, not wanting to work on us or go to marriage counseling, which I suggested. She started sleeping up in her daughter's room and we were effectively separated for months. No sex, no kissing, not even hugging while she works on getting herself better so we can be better. Fast forward to November, She ends up going to hang out with an old friend that she knew before me and had been talking to a lot more recently in Hawaii for a week over Thanksgiving. She told me about it beforehand and that he paid for the whole trip. That was suspicious to me, but I had promised to give her another chance. She went down there and came back pregnant. At this point, I'm not even upset anymore. I know it's over and I'm gearing up to go through the divorce. She was all for getting divorced at first, but changed her tune to wanting to work it out once the baby daddy started saying he didn't want anything to do with the baby and she should get an abortion. However, I'm out, undone, and that was the last straw. I'm kind of glad that I was right in thinking that she would cheat again and that I would be able to finally be done with all this. I have no more moral obligation to be an understanding, patient, and forgiving husband anymore. I know a lot of you at this point are wondering why I stuck through it for so long, why I gave her so many chances and was so forgiving. It's because she has had a really hard life up to this point. She has a bunch of diagnosed mental issues due to a bad childhood, like think of the worst possible childhood you can imagine, and you're probably close. She sees sex differently than normal people. To her, it doesn't have the emotional connections that it has for normal people. I was focused on being the best husband to her that I could be. That was the focus of my whole life, be the best husband I could be and the best father figure for her daughter, patient, understanding, and forgiving with all her issues. I was going to turn her and her daughter's life around and fix everything. I was going to work my butt off so she can do whatever she wanted to do with her life career-wise and so her daughter could go to college, providing everything by myself and turning their lives around completely. That's what I got out of it, at least that's what I told myself. Now I'm just glad it'll be over soon and I can stop giving so much. I don't know if in the end I'm doing the right thing by leaving her, but I know that I can't go on anymore. My goodness, OP, you let this woman run all over you. What were you thinking? It took your wife getting pregnant after cheating on you with multiple different men to finally realize it was time to divorce her? It seems that you are a fixer. Unfortunately, some people are beyond fixing, or more accurately, you can't fix people. They have to fix themselves. They must recognize their issues and want to do the work to heal themselves. I hope you have consulted with a good lawyer so that you will not be saddled with child support for the next 18 years. I also recommend therapy so that you can heal and learn how to get rid of this mentality that you need to save them from their issues and be a hero for them. Good luck, OP. Now let's get into today's second story. So Friday, 10 days ago, me and my soon-to-be ex-wife got into an argument. She moved out to her mom's place at the end of June, but we own our house together. She of course still has her keys and she comes around every once in a while to see the kids, get some of her stuff, and so on. When I went on a trip, she stayed here, and I have also stayed with friends a couple of weekends so she could stay at home with the kids. That Friday, she came over and we had an argument. It got heated and I asked her to leave multiple times. She refused to leave and wanted to talk, so I went to my office and was going to lock the door, but she stood in the doorway. Now keep in mind I am big and tall, but also that I have PTSD from her cheating, and I felt cornered, and she refused to leave when I verbally asked her to, probably about 15 times. I wanted her gone, so I pushed her. I don't want to make excuses for myself, but I think it is a fight or flight response from PTSD. I am not afraid of this woman in a logical sense, but I felt cornered. I did push her hard, but not nearly as hard as I could have. The force should have pushed her back one step and made her put one foot back to catch her balance, but instead she crumpled like a sack of potatoes and fell with her lower back on the doorknob. It is a fancy handle with a pointy end, so it really hurts. She then laid there screaming in pain, in a very exaggerated manner, and it just made me want her out of the house more, so I grabbed her wrists and started pulling her towards the front door. I know this is not by any means okay for me, but I am not thinking logically here. I felt like my fight or flight response was in charge. Turns out she called a women's shelter, claimed I hit her, kicked her, pulled her hair, and threw her out of the house, giving no backstory whatsoever. So of course the women's shelter directed her to the hospital where she gets checked out and talks to a social worker and a police officer. That police officer just called me this morning to get my side of the story. You can imagine how panicked I felt. I am writing this 2 hours later and am still shaking. I told him what happened. We talked for a while and I hope that is the end of it. The only mark they could find on her was on her lower back from the doorknob, so according to him she did not get an injury report done. I don't know how professional it was of him, but once I told him she cheated on me on and off for 13 years, he got a lot more empathetic towards me and assured me if I was telling the truth there was nothing to worry about. I know how this sounds. I'm a man and a big, athletic, bearded, tattooed guy, and she is a beautiful, blonde, blue-eyed woman, so of course people will trust her. I never thought she would lie to the police about something like this. I don't get how someone could be so evil. I'm still shaking and I am sick to my stomach. I puked my breakfast after that phone call. I'm a professor and if I get criminal charges against me, my career is over and my soon-to-be ex-wife knows this. I would never get a teaching job again. OP, take a deep breath. Everything is going to be okay. You did nothing wrong here. Here's what you need to do. Do not ever be alone with her under any circumstance ever again, no matter what. Depending on your vehicle and home situation, set cameras up everywhere. This will be a long game and you will copy and paste all communication via your lawyer. Set up a direct email address that will only deal with her correspondence once you serve her and get communication advice from your lawyer because that's the direction you're going. Keep your distance from her as much as possible. Next time she refuses to leave, instead of trying to physically force her out, just call the police instead so they can escort her. Best of luck, OP. Thanks for taking the time to listen to today's stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't done so yet and comment below on what your thoughts are on today's stories.